Hello, and welcome to Trek Prime, episode 23. We're getting up to the big 2-5 here. And, I know there's a lot of Star Trek movie reviews. I think we both do on YouTube. You can see them. But you always want to add new things to the pot because with Star Trek, there's always, an infinitely diverse amount of opinions with infinite combinations. So here's another infinite combination for the Idica reviews. Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. Now, I know you probably have subtext for it, but I'm sure you've heard this a million times. Maybe you haven't. I have. That the even-numbered Star Trek movies are generally not of quality. Now, that's the objective thing, but that's usually how, or the least successful. That's usually how it's been said. But that may actually be a very good jumping-off point because I have a slightly left-of-center feeling on that. So I'll have you start with a point you wanted to make about this movie right off the bat, since it was your idea.
The first thing was that, Leonard Nimoy wouldn't be in it unless he was given the stipulation that he would be able to direct it. And I think that really kind of launched his directing career, if I'm not mistaken. That was the first movie. And he did pretty well. I thought, for his directorial debut, and was like, wow, he really wowed us.
I watched it this morning, and I think it was you who told me that whole thing about the mind meld in Star Trek 2 and Remember and all of that wasn't originally in there.
No, that's right.
That all came out of the stipulation that Leonard Nimoy would direct the next one.
Yeah.
He'd only come back to it if they did, so they reworked it. So Star Trek 3 could have been an entirely different movie.
Yeah.
If at all. It could have been an utterly Spockless movie. But they decided to go another way with it. So, to extend on that, is there anything else?
Here we pick up basically where Star Trek 2 left off. The interesting thing about this movie is that the novelization adaptation to that movie really fills in more of that gap between Star Trek 2 and 3.
That this morning watching it, because you mentioned that the same thing with the motion picture. Those books, I haven't read those books, nor the books Wrath of Khan, because they're all based on scripts, right?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
And then in scripts, there are things that are on the cutting room floor. They're either film scenes or they're things that are in the script they don't feel are useful. And there was one thing you mentioned about Search for Spock that maybe you want to go into that.
Well, in the book, there's a relationship that begins with Saavik and Kirk's son, and the thing is, it just, I don't know why they didn't put it in the movie. I guess maybe for time or something like that. Maybe because it would just have been like a slow beginning, and probably they didn't want to just make it dragged out too much at the beginning. But I thought it was a pretty good character, development thing, for the two, because and you see later in the movie in Star Trek 3, you see David and Saavik working together on the Grissom, and they seem to have this little bit of a rapport going back and forth with each other.
I noticed that this morning watching it, just from that point of view, you telling me.
Yeah.
And the scene that I remember, because I also made me laugh, where, what's the guy who's the captain of the Grissom? J.T. Esteban. As you know, he says his name like another Star Trek character we've been talking a lot about recently from another series, but he says his whole name. He's into the name thing. So they're exploring Genesis, and David is telling Saavik, well, this is where the fun begins. And Saavik says, oh, just like your father. So and I laugh with that because I thought about it. I said, well, it sounds like an old married couple,
Yeah.
So, like I said, the relationship makes sense because they sound like just a married couple kind of barring. It's that vibe to it.
And of course, when they were on the planet and they sort of had that discussion about, how David kind of cheated a little bit with making the Genesis device by using the proto matter.
And she's sitting there giving him this well-rounded idea of how many paid for your impatience, how many have died, what's yet to come. It's almost like this is not exactly the way just two random officers would be thinking. There's obviously some rapport there.
Yeah.
And I wanted to go back to the beginning with that theory because there's one thing about Star Trek 3 that always had me curious. I'm assuming that it's not too long after Star Trek 2, but I have a feeling there is a wilderness period because in the beginning, now, do you mind if I mention the TV editing issue?
Yeah, go ahead.
That whole scene in the beginning of Star Trek 3 when you see, they have the theme, you see the end of Star Trek 2 replay, that's the theme, is the end of Star Trek 2, they replay it, where Spock's tomb is on Genesis and you see all those clouds and everything, and then they go to a pan of the Enterprise with all that stuff from the con battle. And Kirk is talking about being uneasy and about then he says the trainee crew have mostly gone away and that Saavik and David are off exploring the Genesis planet. Now, when we left the Enterprise off, period, the original Connie.
Yeah.
In Star Trek II, Carol Marcus was there, David was there. So there was a wilderness period between Star Trek II and Star Trek III. I don't know how long that period was, we just didn't see. Were there other missions? Was there other things going on? I was just curious to see how many months was it? How many weeks was it? What happened in that period? Did they just...
I guess you can surmise that they must have rendezvoused with another ship that went back. Well, we know they rendezvoused with the Grissom because they picked up Saavik and David, and that was also spelled out in the book. So, but there was also another ship that was supposed to go back to where the Reliant crew was dropped off, back on SETI Alpha 5.
And the crew were marooned there.
Yeah, so they're still down there. So another ship had to come and send them, to go get them. So, there might have been a couple of points in, where they...
That would have been the wilderness period.
Yeah.
Where they had to go pick up the crew on SETI Alpha 5 that had been marooned there by Khan.
Yeah.
Kyle, Mr. Beach, and all them.
Yeah.
And I don't know, how many people did the Reliant have? 200, 300 people on that ship, so...
Yeah, probably about that.
I'm guessing, like half what the Galaxy class did. But anyways, I mean, Connie.
Yeah.
Next Generation. But yeah, so that would did they ever write a book about that wilderness period between...
They didn't. I mean, they kind of glossed over, that they had... that the Enterprise was denied going back to SETI Alpha 5 to pick up the crew. They said, we have another ship en route to go get them. And they wanted Enterprise back right off because apparently what was going on at Earth was all hell was breaking loose about the Genesis device. And they wanted everybody that had any knowledge about the Genesis device back at Earth.
That's another thing about Star Trek 3 I wanted to mention, because Star Trek 3 to me, and I don't know if you noticed this, could almost be kind of two parts. You have kind of the beginning where he's Starfleet Kirk getting ready to give up the Enterprise. Then he's Insurrection Kirk stealing the ship and going off to save his friend. I think we're beyond spoilers of this movie at this point.
Yeah.
I'm not worried about that stuff. But anyway, so yeah, I want to mention something about the first part. I noticed this just now. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but this is something I'm seeing. The first part of it is, it's almost like everybody in Starfleet picking on the Enterprise veterans. I mean, I never noticed that before. I mean, a lot of them are kind of jerks to him. I mean, they come back and, you mentioned this and I totally forgot Captain Scott.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, everybody's a captain here. Spock had been a captain, he died. Kirk was not a captain, and then Captain Scott. So everybody's giving all these extra ranks or whatever. Yeah. And I don't know. I'm gonna guess.
Sulu was in the process of getting a promotion to captain.
Yeah, Sulu was a commander by then. So.
Yeah, I mean, everybody was getting up in rank where they were commanders or captains or admirals at that point. So I mean, everybody was at that point where they needed to just leave to different jobs. Would
it be safe to say that the Enterprise crew by then are 40 and 50 somethings?
Yeah, they're in their 40s and 50s.
So they're middle-aged people, and they're kind of
So I mean, their days of gallivanting across the galaxy, like Kirk said, is pretty much done. I mean, they're not.
Commander Morrow or Commander Starfleet, depending on what they call him in the movie. There's like two names for him.
Yeah.
I noticed that about Commander Morrow. Is basically saying, "Oh, the Enterprise is 20 years old. I feel her day is over." And then Kirk is, very concerned about Spock, and he wants to go back and get him. And he's saying, "Well, I'm Commander Starfleet. I never understood Vulcan mysticism." And I'm thinking, boy, you're all being kind of jerks to these people, And then Uhura, oh my goodness, she gets the worst of it. But the guy gets his. He's like, "Let me be different to you since you're over the hill."
Yeah.
He's looking at him like, And then, of course, he ends up in the closet. It's like, okay, Uhura, I'm glad you had some dignity because he, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was...
I think part of what was going on in Star Trek 3 was that Starfleet wanted to keep the crew of the Enterprise pretty much under lock and key because they didn't want them going around talking about the Genesis device, you know,
Yeah,
and
and
everything,
maybe
because
that
there
has
were
a lot to do with it,
spies.
you know?
There was spies going around trying to figure out what the hell was made, who made it, you know, and Starfleet, and they were still debating on the legitimacy of the project because it was used to practically wipe out a whole star system at the end of Star Trek 2. I mean, it was like, you know, when the Reliant blew up, I mean, it wiped out a nebula and everything. So they were like, they couldn't cover this thing anymore after that. I mean, so this cat was out of the bag.
So you think that's why everybody was kind of acting like jerks to the Enterprise crew?
Yeah, they didn't want the Enterprise going back. They didn't want Kirk going back. They wanted them to stay right where they were because there was so much debate going on in the Federation Council about the Genesis device that they just wanted them to stay right where they were.
Maybe being older, I recognize that, you know, they're treating him like they're getting ready to put him pasture, you know, and
Yeah.
it's like, you know, and I mean, you see that in other movies, but this was like, they were really pushing
Well,
it.
see, that's the thing about, you know, because Kirk was supposed to be the youngest captain in Starfleet, so we also have to assume he's the youngest admiral in Starfleet. So isn't he a little bit too young to be put out to pasture? You know what I'm saying?
I wasn't really being fair to Kirk or any of them at all. I mean, Kirk was still a young, vital man.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, he was not 90 and in a sick bed.
Yeah.
You know, Bones, who I'm gathering was probably pushing 60 by that point.
Yeah.
At least, was still vital and active seeming.
Yeah.
Chekhov and Sulu were not even 50, I don't think.
Yeah.
They were about, I think, about your age, probably.
Yeah. I mean, these people were in position to become veteran captains of, you know, of starships, and they're kind of just, you get the sense that they're discouraging them from going any further with their careers, you know.
And of course, that would bring up to Styles, who in the movie, they give you every indication he's terribly pompous. But of course, if you read Star Trek novels which aren't canon, he is super huge, mega pompous.
Yeah.
And it's clear Scotty doesn't like him. He doesn't give him much reason to like him. He's one of those characters with their head always on high, you know.
Yeah.
So that stick. He carries his big stick around.
Yeah. Like, what the hell is
Stick,
that? Riding crop. Yeah,
it's like, look at me, I have a stick, you know. Whatever. So he's into swagger and just strutting around and
he's like a future version of General Patton. You know, he's a showman, you know.
Yeah, just all into all that. And, you know, he's treating Kirk like, oh, you know what, I'm going to break the Enterprise's speed record tomorrow, blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, there we go. Boy, they're not really being treated well. And Kirk is just being Kirk and doing his thing. He wants to save his friend. He's not really even that interested in, you know, per se, the Enterprise. He's more interested in getting Spock back at this point. But I wanted to bring up another point that you kind of brought up with this. This could go analogous to, or the Genesis controversy. Now, I mean, that was 1984. That was during kind of the last gasp of the Cold War. And, you know, and in Star Trek 2, I kind of saw this, but in Star Trek 3, I mean, now looking back at the history of the atomic bomb and what happened and all the cloak and dagger around that, do you think that some of the issues of the Genesis planet kind of had a lot to do with how atomic energy was treated at first? Because in a later Voyager episode, when they were dealing with called the Omega Directive, Janeway referenced Oppenheimer and Marcus as people who had to step back and watch history take a turn toward destruction. And when they made that comparison, I'm wondering, do you think that there was, because, you know, I know, I'll get to this later, that I noticed in the writing staff and production staff of Star Trek 3, do you think there was some intended parallel between Genesis and atomic weapons?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was, you know, this parallel, you know, or maybe they were just trying to draw from history about how we reacted to the first H-bomb, you know, and how the world felt about that, you know, and I think that's the way it was perceived in Star Trek 3, that the Genesis device, even though it was made to create life and all that, it was actually used to destroy, and they found out that this thing is more destructive than it is a positive, because, you know, they don't have to look for a planet to create something. They can drop this on any world and destroy it. So it's a lot easier to destroy than to create, as Spock, you know, had said, you know, when
in Star Trek 2.
Yeah.
So this, in a way, Star Trek 3 isn't just a continuation of the Spock story, it's a conclusion to the Genesis one.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you can't, we probably could count on all our fingers how many times Star Trek has presented this great idea and they rode off into the sunset.
Yeah.
They didn't do that with Genesis.
Yeah.
They kind of allowed this to happen. And there's an interesting little mechanic, because in the first movie, David Marcus is almost a foil. Like, the whole idea is to find out that he's Kirk's son.
Yeah.
In the second movie, we start to find out how many character traits he has that are like Kirk. For example, Kirk cheated on the Kobayashi Maru test, sort of.
Yeah.
David did the same thing. I've heard this mentioned in Star Trek before. I guess somebody stabilized it in the future because they were using it. David used something called protomatter, which in the 23rd century, I say that because it's established it was an unstable substance that any ethical scientist wouldn't use, where in the 24th century, I've heard protomatter used willy-nilly. So
yeah.
I'm just mentioning that because obviously they found a way to stabilize it, or there's another protomatter we don't know. But which explained why the Genesis planet was all back asswards, because you had a desert with snow in it in different sectors, and basically a planet that was evolving all screwed up, and the Genesis Matrix apparently could regenerate life. It regenerated Spock.
Yeah.
The microbes on the torpedo turned into
these giant...
What were those things?
They look like worms with cobra heads on them.
Yeah, like cobra wormy things.
Yeah.
And I don't know what those were.
Yeah. When they were small, they looked like winged worms, but then they got bigger and their tentacles grew out.
Yeah, they had these long. They're like orange. Yeah, they just like snake worm things, like lamprey parasites.
Yeah.
So the life forms on Genesis were just unpleasant.
Yeah, everything was accelerated on that planet. I mean, and it's weird that it happened, because while the crew of the Klingon ship was there, and the crew of this and Savick and Dave were there, they weren't affected by that rapid aging while they were there. Only everything that was of Genesis became.
Because when Spock got there,
yeah,
Genesis was still forming.
Yeah.
When those microbes got there from the Enterprise case, Genesis was still forming.
Yeah.
So it kind of became part of the planet's evolution.
That's right. Yeah.
So I don't know what happened. Did Spock just spontaneously age backwards while he was there? Because obviously he got out of the torpedo case.
Yeah, obviously he must have started off as a baby or something like that, and then managed to get out of the tube or something.
He was an adult when they put him down there. His body was an adult, so I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
And not only that, how could he get out of there with absolutely no knowledge? His mind was void.
Yeah, I don't know.
There was a lot of things in that movie about Spock, and here's another thing. We talk about this Enterprise a lot. This movie bought out some of the cloak and dagger we see in a lot of Vulcan culture.
Yeah.
There's a point where, Kirk and the crew are all toasting Spock, and they're talking about their retirement and all this stuff, that they're being put out to pasture at a too young an age, which I agree with you, they were. And they think Scott's going to come in, Scotty, and it's Sarek, who for some reason has this assumption, why did you leave Spock on Genesis?
Yeah.
As if, it's like...
And that was a pretty powerful scene in that movie, because, Sarek showing just a hint of a little bit of rage and anger.
Something about Sarek, that Bandai syndrome thing, I wonder if Sarek had a little emotional problem.
Because he really... he come right at Kirk and all, like, why did you leave him on Genesis? It's like...
in the end, it's like, oh, well, I apologize. My logic is uncertain when it comes to my son.
Yeah.
So, you start to wonder how really secure Vulcan logic actually is. Because, would Vulcan consider emotion to be a form of insanity? Just because of where their culture is.
Well, when you don't deal with your emotions, they overwhelm you, and I think that's the other side of the double-edged sword of trying to be logical all the time. And
Spock, Kirk was trying to balance out his emotions like he usually does. He was obviously upset by Spock's death, but Sarek is giving him this whole thing, and it is powerful. And Kirk's like, "What on earth is he talking about?"
Yeah,
Genesis for, and
nobody knows what he's talking about.
Sarek is so emotional; he's making all these assumptions.
Yeah.
Only his body was in death. Kirk has no clue. And then he says, I have to mind meld with you. Okay. So he does. Kirk has to relive this whole terrible episode of Spock dying. And he's like, oh, I'm sorry. I assumed he mind meld with you. We were separated. He couldn't touch me. So then he finds out something that I'm surprised Kirk didn't know already, because he went into Bones' quarters. Spock's quarters when Bones was in there. He heard Bones talking in Spock's voice.
Yeah.
assuming he heard that, because we heard him talking in Spock's voice, and Spock and Bones was talking about take me home to Vulcan and Mount Seleia, and he thinks that Bones is being hysterical or whatever. And then, when he finds out about the whole thing with Sarah, he says, maybe he might have with someone else. He went back and showed the record tape, which was just scenes from Star Trek 2.
Yeah.
And, now I had a book on tape when I was younger that actually clarified this. It's like, oh, he might meddle with McCoy.
Yeah.
And, in the book on tape I had, they actually left the line that, that explains why he was acting so strangely earlier. I wish they clarified that in the movie. Because Kirk acted like he had no clue what had gone on. It's like, if I had seen Bones acting like that in Spock's quarters, I would look back in the record tape to see what had happened. He knows about mind melds. I don't know why he didn't do that. Maybe he was just overcome with emotion.
Yeah.
Because, it was right there.
Well, in the novelization, he had another episode like that in the beginning where they were having this sort of a wake for Spock, and McCoy started acting funny during that. So that was actually the second time when we see in the movie him behaving oddly. But he had another episode before that, so there was 2 times where Kirk should have been like, something's not right here. Let's go, find out what the hell happened down in engineering, or something.
In the book, there was actually a funeral and a wake for Spock.
Well, yeah, they sort of had a gathering, down in the captain or the officers' lounge or something like that, and everybody was there to just talk about Spock. And McCoy started acting weird while they were there, and everybody was kind of like, huh, and then he's all of a sudden he started talking like McCoy again, but it was like something wasn't right. And then
I'm wondering why. Maybe it was all the upsetment over Spock's death that people didn't notice what was happening. Because we knew about mind melds. We knew that mind melds.
What they do is they just say, oh, all of a sudden we see McCoy is thrown in some kind of a hospital, and that's.
What? I think it's the jerky thing. Everybody in the movie, you're acting really pompous and jerky.
Yeah.
And then I noticed something. The guards. This is just a little thing. The guards that are guarding Spock's quarters.
Yeah.
They're wearing these football things, so these big padded football things on their face.
Yeah.
So everybody's acting very paranoid and very jerky, and it's not the typical Starfleet polished thing where they're trying to seek something out. It's like they're trying to hide things.
Yeah, and here's the thing: Sulu goes down to want to see McCoy or something like that, and then the guy at the desk stands up and gives him an attitude. Now he's talking to a superior officer now.
Don't get smart, Tiny.
Yeah, this guy here, he's actually being insubordinate with a superior officer. So,
that's what I mean. Everybody in this movie is being jerky.
Yeah. It's like, I don't care if you're a security officer. I'm a commander. You're just a lowly ensign. Stand aside.
I never realized this, watching Star Trek before. Like, guys, this is Kirk and Spock and Uhura. These are on your. Was that the Enterprise? Was Connie a flagship or something for them?
They were supposed to be these celebrated,
right?
heroes that came home
like they're some human.
The only people that came home from the 5-year mission, they were hailed as heroes of the Starfleet.
Like, give the guys a break here. You're being kind of rude to all of them, and and they're calling Sulu tiny when he's like way above whatever the hell you are.
Yeah, really.
So then of course Sulu breaks in because of the whole thing. He's like, oh, don't call me tiny.
Yeah.
Really? The guy had that remark kind of coming. You're being rude and insubordinate, like you said.
Yeah.
Boy, they're being real jerks to these people, So I noticed that. I never noticed how jerky they were being before until I looked at it in the context. These people had actually, I'm sure they were all venerating over Spock, but it's like, oh, we're going to treat the rest of you like crap.
Yeah.
So, because you know about Genesis, so you can't do this and you can't do that.
Yeah.
And, to be honest with you, I don't know if the controversy of it made a difference, but I don't know.
Well, here's the thing. Remember originally when they remember the tape in Star Trek 2 when they showed Dr. Marcus explaining the Genesis device on the recording?
And then they had
Star
Kirk
Trek 3. In Star Trek 3, they took her out of it, and it's Admiral Kirk giving that.
What was that all about?
I don't know, but
see, that made Kirk in there?
That made it more controversial, and why he wasn't allowed to go back to Genesis is because he was giving the explanation of the Genesis device, not Dr. Marcus. It was her device, not he. Did
Dr. Marcus or Carol Marcus say, okay, Kirk?
What happened was exactly what David was saying in Star Trek 2. He was afraid that Starfleet would take that away from them and use it as a weapon. Well, what the hell happened? Admiral Kirk takes possession of all the information about it, and he gives a dissertation to Starfleet about what this thing is, and he uses all the footage from what Carol Marcus had made. So basically, he just did what his son was afraid was going to happen. Starfleet basically took ownership of the Genesis device, and that's what made the whole thing.
At least in the director's version of Star Trek II, we established Genesis was a civilian project.
That's right. It was a civilian project.
David spent most of Star Trek II, what character he had in that, because he didn't have much. He was mostly a foil, saying. Yeah. Actually standing up on a pedestal saying the scientists are always pawns of the military. I know this perverted into a weapon, blah, blah, blah. Basically almost seeing this, again, like the construction of the H-bomb.
Yeah.
Well, we're talking about Oppenheimer, the A-bomb, but still, atomic energy. So, he's concerned about the science over the militarism of it. So basically, David in Star Trek II is more or less an activist, scientist, and then in Star Trek 3, he's slowly morphing into his father. But who made a mistake? And I wanted to mention that, the protomatter. He blew Genesis to begin with because he didn't know how to solve problems without it.
Yeah, it was
what happened to that planet if... So the whole thing didn't work. It was not a success.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to mention Klingons. This is a whole lot about Klingons I noticed in this movie. I believe, if I understand it, this was the first time it was actually a decisive Klingon language. I think we've discussed this.
Yeah.
In the motion picture, I mean, I hear it now and almost laugh to myself. The Klingons aren't actually speaking a language. The subtitles are fooling you into thinking they are.
Yeah.
They're actually just blah, 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 blah. Making sounds. If you take the subtitles out of your head, they're just barking at each other without any syntax.
Just making sounds, yeah.
Well, you can hear in Star Trek 3, there's a syntax and a language being developed.
Yeah.
And now there's a book that explains this, but I was wondering, Commander Krug, who was the protagonist in this, he does a lot of things that Klingons aren't really supposed to do. Number one, he's into taking prisoners.
Yeah.
Kirk made it abundantly clear at the beginning of Star Trek II, Klingons at that time did not take prisoners. Yeah. They don't like you, they kill you. End of story.
Yeah.
This guy, this Klingon he killed, blew up the Grissom, probably typical Klingon policy. Crew shoots him and kills him because he wanted prisoners. When by Klingon standards, he actually did the correct thing. So, is Krug's ship acting under orders from the Empire? Are they a renegade group? I was never quite sure because Krug was involved with, I don't know if they were married or if she was a Parmakai Valkyrie at the beginning of the movie. She's stolen the Genesis tape that Kirk made.
Yeah.
From who knows where.
Yeah.
Was she a Starfleet spy? I don't know if the book established any of that, but
yeah.
So she gives it to this freighter of civilian people from who knows where, and Krug destroys the ship to get rid of evidence, I guess, and she's on a kamikaze mission.
Yeah, well, he killed her because she saw the tape, basically.
Right, it's a kamikaze mission.
Yeah.
And they don't know that. The crew of the freighter don't know that. They think they're going to get paid.
Yeah. And
they're actually on the same mission. They don't know it. So he's behaving in ways that, if you look at Klingon society, aren't considered particularly honorable. And I had this theory looking into Star Trek's future. Was Krug associated with the House of Doros, possibly? Like he was from a renegade Klingon house.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, supposedly this crew here, there was only 12 people on this ship.
Right, a dozen officers and men.
A ship that small, that scale, wouldn't be sent out on an assignment of that magnitude. They would probably have sent out, probably a larger ship, maybe, with a more experience and a more a diverse crew or something like that on the ship. This was too big of a thing for just this little tiny scout ship to be dealing with. They were trying to learn about the Genesis device. So what I think was this guy was working on his own, trying to make a name for himself in the Empire, by, I got the secret to the Genesis device, and I'm going to come back and earn my, whatever rank he wanted to be, or like some kind of a, high, political figure or something, maybe.
And this was just a rogue Klingon.
Yeah, I think he was just acting rogue. I mean, somehow he found out about this Genesis thing, and he wanted information from it, which he sent the, Valkyries out to get. And when he got that, and he found out that, there was this test site, he sent his ship there to, find out what was done. And, but he went way beyond it. I mean, because there was supposed to be this ceasefire between the Klingons and the Federation, which I guess at some point between Star Trek the Motion Picture and Star Trek 3, that ceasefire had ended somewhere, because there was they openly fired on the Grissom and destroyed the ship. I mean, even though he didn't want that ship destroyed. I mean, it was like there was no second thought about it. Just shoot it, and I mean, that would have been like, you're just declaring war. But then as soon as it was discovered later on, it was like, well, we didn't, we have a right to defend ourselves, basically, or something like that. The Klingons tried to whitewash it away when it was revealed what they had done. But the thing of it is that, this really kind of made a sort of a like, what about the treaty you had? I mean, the Organian peace treaty, because a lot of Star Trek fans said, well, they shouldn't be able to shoot at each other if the Organians had ceasefire forced on between them. So it was like, something contradictory happened there. So, you know what I'm saying?
It was made clear in the movie, just the way Kirk was acting, that Krug was acting totally out of bounds with the Klingons.
That's right.
If it wasn't an Organian peace treaty, he shouldn't have been firing at anybody.
That's right.
And he shouldn't have been coming over into Federation territory, and there was an established neutral zone. And not only that, why would, like you said, this little scout class bird of prey be going out to do something with the enormity of the Genesis project?
Yeah. And another thing about the bird of prey, and I think it missed a lot of people, except there was this one fellow that mentioned it to me when I was in the service. The bird of prey was actually a Romulan ship, because if you remember, when it fired, they called it torpedoes, but what they were plasma torpedoes coming out from the nose of the warbird. Because if you see, when they go and do a close-up, you see the thing forming inside the thing, which was a plasma type energy. That's a weapon typically found on Romulan ships, is a plasma-based energy like that. It wasn't photon torpedoes; it was plasma torpedoes.
So you think that what happened is that, during the time where the Romulans and the Klingons were allied somehow, there was a trade of technology, because Romulans were using Klingon vessels. And
there was a trade in technology.
So the bird of prey, you're saying, originally had a Romulan origin?
Yeah, the bird of prey was a Romulan design. I mean, I think the Klingons wanted the cloaking technology, and that was probably why they wanted that bird of prey, was so they could get their hands on that. And that's when, after that, you see a lot of Klingon ships have the cloaking device. You never saw it in TOS, the Klingon vessels cloaking and all that. That only happened way after the movies and stuff like that, when we see the Next Generation and we see Klingon ships cloaking and uncloaking and stuff like that. Then we see
the Romulan Klingon alliance is kind of fickle, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very short-lived for that. It doesn't last very long. They get what they wanted, and then they just sever their ties right off the bat, if something happened.
And there's one other thing I noticed about the movie that we were just talking about this, that I found really exciting and fascinating, because I don't want to go out of the idea of Trek Prime, but this is an Easter egg. When they go into the space dock and they see the Excelsior for the first time, there is a ship behind one of the space docks, and it is, who designed it? It was actually a mock-up for the ship that we're going to use in Phase 2.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of who designed that right now. I want to get the name right. This is what happens if you don't.
You could just see the rear of it, sticking out.
I just want to get the information exactly right about who did.
With a very strange warp nacelle, I have to point out. It was,
it was like a pipe.
Yeah, I mean, it looked like it was like a stovepipe or something. It's like, because at first when you see it, you don't really think much of it. You just kind of, your eyes just gloss over it. But you have to go through the tape or the DVD and just pause it, and you get to see a longer look at it, and it's really not that sophisticated looking, and it's like, well, but it looked like they took it right from the drawing. Basically, it was like made right from the actual drawings that were made of the Phase 2 Enterprise,
So I don't remember who actually did that design, but a lot of people I've heard now actually said that was perhaps the Discovery. I know that's a weird thing to say, but just because. But like I said, that
I mean, because we know now that that's not what the Enterprise eventually evolved into. So we kind of say, well, what was it then? Then it must have been the Discovery, right?
Or an earlier ship,
yeah.
But it was just a model they had back there. They probably didn't expect anybody, because we've talked about this many times, you and I, about how fans notice Easter eggs that people don't think they'll notice.
Yeah.
Like, just shove any old ship in the background. Nobody's going to care. They're going to focus on this Excelsior, and we do. I mean, but now that I'm knowing to look for that, it's kind of hidden behind.
Yeah.
Almost like we could do a whole other story about what's happening around Star Trek 3. What's that other ship doing there?
Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing about that movie is that's the first time we actually get to see a lot more of Starfleet than we actually saw in any of the other movies. I mean,
I want to mention the space dock, that giant mushroom-shaped space dock orbiting Earth.
Yeah.
That apparently has varying sizes. We've talked about this because the Connie going through it fits pretty much angled to the doors. It's like it's all size for it. So flash forward to Next Generation, we see the Enterprise D flying through there. It's also flushed through the doors. So I'm guessing either they had the door expanded or is the larger version.
The Excelsior, which was supposed to be larger, seemed to fit through those same doors too. I mean, it was like
unless the doors could just were ambidextrous and could change size.
Ambidextrous. Maybe they were made out of rubber or something.
Yeah, maybe they were just like all these little. Maybe like Galaxy Quest. Remember how they had that engineering with all those things that would things. Maybe it was like that Galaxy Quest thing where they would just go. Like a Jenga game.
I mean, it looks cool, but I think it's really not a very practical design for a space dock for ships because you got all these different size ships. So why would you put a door that these ships have to go through if you got large, medium, small? I mean, why don't you just have it opened up so that way they can just go in and park like they did in the unmentionable Abrams films or something.
That's not unmentionable. We're just not talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, it was just just park them. Like they did. Like when they did TOS when they did the K7 station, they just had.
Park them as a starter. Don't have them parked on like a little sidewalk and put a toll into it. I mean, not that.
Yeah, I mean,
They're just silly things they could do.
I mean, we know they got a dry dock, and that doesn't go inside of an enclosure. I mean, it's out there. I mean, it's just
Oh, I wanted to add this about actually, let's not add that. But the dry dock is from another movie, but because I noticed you mentioned in Star Trek 2, they were kind of reusing in Wrath of Khan. They were using some of the footage from the motion picture in that, them coming out of the space dock.
Yeah,
looking all beautiful and everything, and then when they get out, they're all weathered.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, beautiful in the space dock, and then when they get out.
Yeah.
But in Star Trek 3, of course, the Enterprise is basically a beat-up bucket that's coming back to the... Well, it's not really a bucket. This is a beat-up old ship that comes back.
Well, actually, it was, because they added more damage to it than that was initially there from...
Right. You also mentioned that, too, that they kind of overdressed the damage in 3.
Yeah, if you notice the same damage pattern on both sides of the ship now, so that means Khan, when he fired into the engine room, actually the beam went through the other side.
So that ship didn't survive.
The beam went through one side and out the other, so it actually made the same damage mark all the way back. It just carved right into it.
Like I never noticed the marking difference, but I guess it's there. I don't know.
I mean, I guess it wasn't enough that they had black spots, on just one side. No, we got to pepper it all over the place, so that looks like they went through living hell. It's like.
Now, I will say one thing that I do like about the beginning of Star Trek 3. I far prefer the way the Enterprise is lit at the beginning of that movie, because in Star Trek 2 and later on in 3, they kind of ended up making that bridge all dark.
Yeah, it was very dark.
I kind of prefer that bridge when it's lit. It has a whole different flavor.
Well, from the very start of the movie, I mean, the bridge was all the light was much brighter. I think Leonard Nimoy preferred it that way, but also at the same time, it really exposed just how out of whack the uniforms went with that new background, which only re-emphasizes the fact as to why they had to darken it in Star Trek 2, because the uniforms with their
they have those dark maroon things.
It doesn't blend with that background.
I wanted to mention, we talked about those pins in the uniforms before, and again, I'm not being, because we were concerned about this with the Deep Space Nine thing. That we might be a little bit critical, but when I saw Commander Morrow's arm when he was talking to Kirk in that little place, did you see the pins? The pins.
Oh yeah,
like 1,000 pins all over his arm, like pepper with pins.
Yeah.
I'm surprised he didn't get up and like ping, 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 ping flying off all over the room. And Kirk's like, Commander, you lost using your pins. You gotta put them back.
Yeah.
And he's got him like a zillion on his arm. There's like this armband. He's got 4 or 5 pins here. There's pins.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm surprised they didn't just jingle around like Klingons. All those pins everywhere. Especially on Commander Starfleet had all these pins everywhere. On his arm. It was like these things, these little like ramp pins on every end of his arms. Like, how can you move your arm with that?
And that's all another point, about how they have dress uniforms and stuff like that on Next Generation. Well, they don't need them in Star Trek 2 or 3 when they have a special dignitary aboard because they're already wearing it. It's got it has all the pins and everything.
I saw his arm. I thought of our conversation. And, oh my goodness, I'm overwhelmed by the pins. And I'm listening to their conversation because he's being a jerk to Kirk, which it rhymes. But yeah, he was. I mean, not so much that he's denying him to go to Genesis. I sort of get why he's doing that. Like, well, I don't understand Vulcan mysticism. What would happen to your tolerant Starfleet ways all of a sudden?
Yeah, really.
Just fly out the window. But he's sitting there, and I'm looking at all these pins. I'm thinking, oh, jeez, if he moves his hand, they're going to go.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of weird. When he said that. I mean, having the Vulcans around for all those, for 100 years, and he still acts like it's like a voodoo cult or something like that. Or it's like,
I mean, again, it's like look at these people.
It's who are these people? They're just vagabonds. They're carpetbaggers from another. He's making it sound like these people are illegitimate or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, and even Kirk is being really ethical. He's like, oh, you don't have to believe in this. Why? He's like, I mean, he's almost like, what was that all about? Now, of course, if Picard had been there, that would have been a 20-minute lecture.
Oh God, yeah.
Well, I'm glad it would have been, but that's Picard's thing, the speeches and the ethics, and Kirk was like, you don't have to believe. I mean, almost like, why are you saying that for? You're supposed to be ethical Starfleet guy.
Picard might have made an actual convincing case to go back to Genesis. He might not have had to steal the Enterprise. He would have convinced Admiral Morrow that.
And then he tells him this whole line where he basically insults Kirk and says, "Oh, your career stands for rationality, not intellectual chaos. If you behave, you'll destroy things. You'll destroy your career and everything." I'm like, so you're a Commander Starfleet, security, and a counselor? Not like that. You're basically insulting Kirk and calling him emotional.
Yeah.
And not thinking in his right mind, when in actuality, he's seeing a little beyond the pale here. There's just something missing on that ship, and he knows it. And and you get the perception that he understands his whole death has to be redeemed somehow.
Yeah.
And he's telling him this thing that Sarek said. And like I said, well, obviously, Spock and Kirk, there was an episode in the original show, they consider themselves brothers.
Yeah, well, even in the mock time, I remember how he's basically kind of thumbed his nose up at Starfleet to bring Spock to Vulcan. It's like, isn't this worth a career? I mean, he saved my life many times over,
Well, if you go by Enterprise logic, the Vulcans were apparently sneaky in the 22nd century, so there's some issue that Starfleet has with them that, they're kind of a Victorian culture with a sneaky side, so let's just screw them all. I don't know.
So, at that point, they really should know more about the Vulcan people than they really do because, I mean, all the mind meld stuff and all these things that they went through, why are they acting like, well, what are you talking about? What's this mysticism, magic and all this stuff? They're acting like they never heard of these people before. It's like they've been around for over 100 years. What do you mean you don't know these people?
But it's almost like they were trying to find any reason to not allow Kirk to go on that mission.
Yeah.
By even cementing
the issues of order to everybody on the, you're not allowed to discuss with anyone.
That whole remark to Kirk from Commander Morrow sounded kind of racist. I mean, just to me it did, against Vulcan people. And but yeah. So, okay, I just want to establish I love this movie, even though a lot of the characters are jerks to the Enterprise crew, but
yeah,
they were. I think that was the whole idea. Like you said, there was this whole spy thing with Genesis, and maybe they were kind of paranoid. And as we know in our own culture, what does paranoid breed? Prejudice.
Yeah.
So I think maybe there was this prejudice, You didn't hear anything about Klingons so much. They were just kind of along for the ride.
Well, nobody knew what was going on.
Right, Kirk figures it out.
Because when they lost contact with the Grissom, I mean, remember while Kirk was en route to Genesis, Starfleet was trying to get a hold of Genesis, and they couldn't get a hold. There was no response.
I'm going to give a little shout out to my friends over at Trek Yards, Stuart and Samuel, who brought this up when they. What?
I was just saying hi.
Yeah. Oh, okay. I thought you said Anyway, no, they did a video on on their favorite bridges, and I really get a chance to look at it a little more in depth. The Excelsior Bridge, actually one of the more unique bridges of that time. And I realized something they had said. It's actually very TOS-y.
Yeah, it is. It
has more of the little colored knobs and everything.
A lot of black, it goes around.
Black paneling. It's much more TOS-like than it is movie era.
I actually like that design better than what they ended up with later.
Yeah, it's very unique. The interesting thing about it, I didn't notice this at first, there's little green glowing lights on the bottom of the chairs.
Yeah, they all had like floor lighting or something,
Everything is very, when you go into the bridge, when Styles enters the bridge, you see these lights that say all these things, like these big light warnings. Everything's light, light. Everything's always lit up and little things that, it's like TOS, everything lit up, and where when you get to the movies, everything is more like a button you just kind of toggle, you press.
Yeah.
Where in the originals, there were little lights and little flickery things everywhere. Yep. So this had more of a TOS flavor. So it's almost like the Excelsior Bridge was almost like a strange step back in a way, but also is a future thing.
Yeah, they took the step back and made it look sleeker, in a way. It was like, they maybe it was an idea that they were actually borrowing concepts from Mr. Scott's. Remember when they asked him, "We need your wisdom aboard the new Excelsior," because probably they were using some of ideas that Scotty had in his career to build the Excelsior.
I wanted to ask you a question. We know from TOS that a guy named Larry Marvick helped design the Enterprise.
Yeah.
Did Scotty himself personally participate in building the ship?
He probably come up with ideas on how to modify the existing ideas that the men that you just mentioned had. You know what I'm saying?
Yes. So you're saying this?
Remember how I said in the book, the motion picture, that all when Spock's station, the science station, was designed on recommendations made by Spock on how to, what things they could do to improve the science station, and the same went for Lieutenant Uhura's station, how she had recommendations. So all these people, after 5 years in space, had recommendations on improvements they could make on the systems on the ship, which they installed when they were in space dock refitting the Enterprise into the refit Connie. So Scotty was there, and he had his ideas on the new engineering systems to put in place and all that. So yeah, I mean, it was constant. It's just that it illustrates how one generation, or we'll just add another step to what we know, and in the next we'll add more to it, and it just gets more advanced as time goes on. So I think with the Excelsior in Star Trek 3 is what we're seeing is that when the ship looked, like you said, looked TOS-y, but it still looked like it was more advanced because they took some ideas that, that they started with, and they added the odd modifications that later came about from suggestions by Scotty and the rest of the crew, and they probably went by that to design the new bridge for the Excelsior.
And later on with the Excelsior, they just kind of gave it an Enterprise A-ish kind of look.
Yeah.
With some modifications. But originally it had a totally unique look.
Yeah.
But like I said, I don't know. That was the NX Excelsior too.
That was the prototype. It was the prototype for all that class.
It was eventually given an NCC designation, and
they put it on active duty. Maybe
when it was on active duty, they had to make it a little more uniform.
Well, it's a number of years had gone by though. By then, so that was probably modifications on top of modifications at that point.
So that Excelsior could have just been an experimental bridge. That could have been. I mean, I don't know, because it looked very TOS-y. I kind of liked it. It was huge. It seemed huge to me.
Yeah, it was way bigger than.
Oh, and I noticed something. They had the late Miguel Ferrer in there as I took you, because I'm used to him having much shorter hair, but I took a look at that and said, yeah, I know who that is. So that was a little interesting Easter egg. But I don't know if we've discussed this, but I'm wondering how that transwarp would have worked, because we've talked about this in Voyager, how they invented this bizarre off the wall kind of infinite velocity. You occupy every point and become a lizard and all that stuff. So.
I have to say, when I was watching the movie, I was interested to see what it was going to look like taking off at transwarp, and then you hear it sound like the motor fell out, like in the Three Stooges, when they were taking a shovel, There was this episode of the Three Stooges where they had the hood open on a car and they were shoveling the parts back in. And the guy starts the ignition and it starts good. He goes, "Oh, it sounds good." Then he puts his foot on the accelerator. All you hear are parts falling out underneath.
Obviously, Scotty sabotaged the ship, and it looked like he took a bunch of little plumbing devices out. If you notice,
it was just like a little chip or something that he pulled out of the thing.
He gave was it the Chekhov or something? A bunch of little plumbing fixtures, and then when you hear the ship when they try to go to warp, it goes. And
the computer's all messed up and everything just from pulling out a few things.
So it must have been really easy to sabotage because usually you think we just not go to warp, but you heard all these things like falling apart.
Yeah.
Like it's like this motor that isn't working. I just found that funny. It sounded like the ship had an engine. Like Styles would go down there and say, "Okay, shovel some more coal into the warp." Burning up. I
mean, they build it up like this thing was going to rocket away like something you never seen before in Star Trek history, but it just stalls right in space.
Well, I hate to say this. Unfortunately, Star Trek has been very guilty of this. They tend to use transwarp as a catch-all for anything faster than the regular warp.
Yeah, exactly.
So whatever, the Borg have a transwarp, which is whatever. Then passing warp 10 is infinite velocity for some reason.
Yeah.
I wonder if that transwarp was just that ultra warp thing they were doing.
Maybe it could have been like a forerunner to that. It could have been,
Maybe it did have transwarp drive. Maybe that was the ultra warp thing. They just called it transwarp because transwarp drive we got a fast. It's transwarp drive. You just call it.
It just sounds cool. I mean,
maybe that ship actually went up to warp 9, but it was on the ultra warp scale.
Yeah, maybe.
Who knows? I mean. And I want to get into the thing about the Excelsior. This is not canon, and this is not the new stuff either. We're going to get into it. DC, I didn't read this. I have one of them, but you told me about this, and it's really funny. Did a comic book. You can buy them bundled together. It's called The Mirror Universe Saga, and it actually takes place between Star Trek 3 and 4. Mm-hmm. And you describe the Excelsior's proportions as being
gargantuan,
off the wall in this,
bigger than the Enterprise D. I mean, nobody got the impression of how big the Excelsior was to the Enterprise in that movie. Okay, because whenever you saw it was like they were from away in a distance, backing out of the space dock. They were always too far apart, so you couldn't get the scale of it right. So when they started doing the comic books, they would throw the scale way off on the Excelsior. The Excelsior was this monstrous superstar destroyer-looking thing where they could dock a bird of prey in the shuttle bay or something like that. And the Mirror Enterprise was like it was flying, at full impulse towards the Excelsior. It seemed like they could never reach it because the ship was so big.
And when I saw the movie, now I've seen Star Trek 6, and you see the ships together, and the Excelsior is big, but not that big.
Yeah.
And I just, even in Star Trek 3, I don't get the idea it's quite that big.
Yeah.
Because it leaves that space dock, and what you describe would be bigger than that space dock.
Well, you could go by the windows on the Excelsior, just how big. If you gauge it by that, that's how you tell.
It's about what Star Trek's proportions would be. It's not.
Yeah.
It's not a teeny-weeny ship either. It's obviously big, but it's,
Yeah.
But I just found that funny that in the DC comics, they made it this super Olympic ship that could fit other ships inside it. And,
and the sick bay was like this giant, like 5,000 gymnasiums all together. And it was like rows upon rows upon rows of
they just over dramatized the.
Yeah. I mean, they must echo everywhere they talk. It must be an echo, It's like, this thing.
Yeah, and that's one of the weird things about Star Trek 3, and I've heard about this.
Yeah.
There's this history that toy marketers actually marketed for all the wrong movies. Star Trek 2 was very successful, but didn't have any toys to go with it. And there were toys for Star Trek 3, but I don't think the movie resonated with young people.
Yeah.
Which is something I do find interesting about the movie that I actually like. This is a bit of an emotional jump cut, but I suppose the comic book thing kind of helps relieve a little bit of the pressure. Because I mean, that's just I haven't read that comic. If I do, I'm gonna, now that I know what we talked about, I'm gonna see that. But anyway, because I know how big the Excelsior is supposed to be and whatever.
Yeah.
But anyway, so there's this one thing I noticed about this movie is that, remember when Leonard Nimoy said that with Star Trek 4 they wanted to lighten up a little bit?
Yeah, because the previous two movies were so grim and.
Right. I never realized how heavy-handed Star Trek 3 is in some ways. Because, first of all, you start out with them dealing with the death of Spock.
Mm.
Then a character we've just met gets blown up.
Mm.
Then, basically, Kirk and his crew get kind of bullied by the rest of Starfleet for the next 20 minutes. Then, the crew of the Grissom get destroyed. Then David gets killed, I think, trying to protect Savick because it was intended that Savick got killed.
Yeah.
He wanted to prove to Kirk that, whatever. So then David gets killed. Then Kirk blows up the Enterprise and watches it ascend into the atmosphere.
Yeah.
Then at the end of the movie, basically, I'm describing most of the kind of arc of the movie here, I guess, but the Enterprise is blown up and everything. Kirk's on the planet, and he asks crew to beam down to settle this once and for all. Now, this is the man who ordered the death of, what became his son, basically. But Kirk says, if we don't help each other, we'll die here. So he's offering him clemency. So they start getting into a fight. Krug launches on this huge boulder that comes out of the ground. I always found that a little bit of a coincidence, even when I was younger. How he just happened to have this rock rise up.
Yeah.
Jump off of it, but I don't know. It's just a weird dramatic effect that the rock would rise up like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, so he launches off the rock, and then they start fighting, and then they jump down into this thing where there's a lava pit below them. So Krug loses balance and falls off. And Kirk, again, offers clemency and says, oh, give me your hand. So then Krug tries to grab him down. And there's that infamous, I have had enough of you. And there goes Krug.
Yeah.
So Kirk is offering clemency to this man who killed his son twice, and he wants to kill him.
Yeah.
So, there's all this stuff that's happening. The Spock aging thing is very strange. Now that I think about it, there's some strange...
It seemed very coincidental that they managed to save him just as he looked in the previous movie. You know what I'm saying? Not before, but...
that whole thing where the cheek was all pulsating, that was a puppet, right?
Yeah.
I've seen pictures. That was actually a puppet they made of Nimoy's face.
Yeah.
I mean, if they left him there 5 minutes longer, he might have been too old.
Yeah.
So it was all a little conveniently timed. But even Savick said we got to get him off this planet before he gets to be like 200 Vulcan years old. You know? So I mean, she warned them. So it wasn't like she didn't warn them. But I mean, just the idea that she's looking at this and she's like, oh my goodness, I am witnessing a person aging like 10 years in 1 minute. And I mean, even she seems emotionally taken. And not only that, he goes to the Pumfar in one scene. Yeah. And, I don't know if this is what Vulcans do, but she's basically kind of making out with him.
Well, she offers herself to him, and see, that's the thing, because they had this one little scene in that's in the next movie, but there was that moment, which again is, drives home that big thing I was telling you about Star Trek 6, about bringing that.
Yes, that was supposed to be Savick rather than Kim Cattrall.
Yeah, that would have made that whole thing much, much more poignant. But anyway, back to Star Trek 3. I mean, it's like, this Pon-farr thing has to be dealt with. I mean, there's like, you can't, there's like, well, she's the only female.
Yeah, you can't tease, you'd have to.
I mean, what are you going to do? I mean,
I'd like to hope there was no R-rated scene on Genesis we didn't see, but anyway.
Well, it would have killed him if she didn't do what she had to do.
I don't know. I mean, this thing may have been some kind of Pumfar relief. I don't know.
That's how they kiss, I guess, is that. That's like
I thought it may have been like a tantric thing, maybe.
Yeah, it's sort of like, remember Spock did it in TOS with the Romulan? Remember the Romulan in TOS and Spock? They were doing that with the fingers.
Yeah, and Spock and Amanda, and Sarek and Amanda did that too, that little finger thing.
That's right, yeah.
That's like, I guess that's like Vulcan hand-holding, or...
Could be something like that.
Some form of Vulcan affection where it's all very finger. Because Spock said they were hand-oriented.
Yeah.
So I guess they're all into little finger things. So anyway, but there's this scene, I don't know if it was Pumfar or just where, I guess Spock being like maybe aging to like high school age or what, I don't know how old he's supposed to be, picks up this Klingon and throws him about 20 feet.
Yeah.
I was like, how freaking strong are these Vulcans?
Yeah, what is he, the Hulk now? He turns into the Hulk and he throws
I mean, I found that, now I know it was hyper aging or like mega Pumfar, where they have these Klingons who only seem to be susceptible to androids. like lore. And all of a sudden Spock, who's apparently a teenage Spock, lifts him like 20 feet into the air and just throws him. Like, well, that's a little bit much. Boy, we must be very afraid of Vulcans, I guess.
Maybe that's why Shatner had to top him in Star Trek V.
Right.
You know, with throwing that Cation like halfway across the bar.
Right. So they slow motion that scene too, where Spock throws him.
Yeah.
It's like $6 million man or something.
$6 million man sound effect.
That effect in there, like. It was a little bit much. And when I was younger, I was like, "Oh, come on, you saying that adolescents can pick up a Klingon and just toss him into the air?"
Yeah, I mean, Klingons are stronger than humans, so I imagine it wouldn't have been that easy. But it's just
unless it's like Hyper Mega Punthar, and he just had this superhuman strength.
Yeah.
Then Spock could turn one of those Enterprise monitors into a piece of aluminum foil. So, I mean, I don't know. Vulcan strength is nice, right? I mean, you can throw a Klingon. I don't know. Klingon Vulcan body throw. I don't know. There's a Klingon Vulcan wrestling match, so I don't know who would be the stronger.
That's basically how Kirk was fighting Krug there. He jumps off the high rope there, you know, basically. Like, right,
because the rock launches up below him, and Krug just jumps off. Everything on Genesis is very convenient for the surfaces, you know. Like, you know, they're sitting there equal, and then all of a ssudden, when they start fighting, that rock rises up so we can jump on him. It's almost like Genesis is taking rounds, like, okay, Krug versus Kirk, 1 point, 2 point, or in Star Trek, 3 quat-loos, 4 quat-loos.
It's one he didn't jump off the roof with an elbow drop or something like that on top.
Yeah, I mean, it was a little convenient, that scene where you just leaping off.
I mean, it's another indication of just how weird Kirk does when he fights, you know.
Yeah, William Shatner's fighting mechanic is one of a kind.
It's just you just whatever he comes to mind, he tries it, you know.
So anyway, after this whole thing, they beam on to the bird of prey, which nobody knows how to work because it's Klingon.
Yeah.
So Chekhov's like, it's this, no, it's this, and then Scott's like, it's that or nothing, and I guess it works. And Kirk says he's going to kill John Larroquette's character Maltz. Now, I now that I think about it, that's actually the first indication the Klingons would prefer death to prison.
Yeah, that's right.
Because when Maltz like, I thought you were going to kill me when he says I'm going to take you prisoner, he says, oh, I lied.
Yeah.
Maltz is very unhappy because Klingons would rather die than be prisoners. So you saw that indication of that there.
Yeah,
so that was an
would be a dishonor. It'd be a dishonor to be taken prisoner.
Right, because we don't know anything about Klingon culture at this point. We don't really have a good idea about what they do. Yeah. We just know they're the enemy and they're bad, and that's it. You know, we don't. The next generation is all these layers upon layers of honor and ritual, and you start seeing that a little in the end of 3. So I guess Maltz was taken back to the Federation Council and given a debriefing. Yeah,
I think there were some books written, you know, about what happened to him, you know, or some comic books were written about his character, you know what happened to Maltz, you know.
Yeah, well, obviously, I don't think John Larroquette was going to appear in another Star Trek film, so Maltz was over. So
no, but you know, I mean, he was the only Klingon that didn't die. I mean,
the other ones were killed in the Enterprise.
Yeah.
I assume they were the ones who killed David. They were the ones who killed Krug. You know, he died when Kirk could have saved his life, but he was too into killing Kirk, so whatever. But then after this whole thing, they go.
Oh, remember the dog, the Klingon dog we saw on that?
Oh God, that dog! It looked like a hamburger.
It looked like a lizard at first. I mean, are we supposed to assume that's a targ? Because the targs we see later on
Star Trek, the targ was more like a porcupine or a warthog.
Or like a boar or something.
Yeah,
but
this thing looked all burnt up and had all these weird.
Yeah, it had ribs and it was all skeletal like, you know, and it was like
it was kind of gross. It was,
and it had all this slime all over it and everything.
Maybe that was a Klingon equivalent of some old mangy dog.
Yeah, I mean,
like maybe it was a malnourished targ. I don't know.
Maybe that was supposed to be there just to show the audience that this was sort of a renegade Klingon crew, you know, because maybe Klingons don't really bring their pets on more, you know, or something like that on the bridge.
I mean, you wouldn't want to see a crew with a little white poodle or anything.
Well, I mean, we had Archer with his little dog there. I mean, it was like
you wouldn't see you know, Klingons with a little prize poodle petting it. It is not I, Outsider, it's you. Oh, you killed doggy. I will kill you.
He got all upset there when Kirk hit the ship. There were a couple torpedoes and his dog got killed. It's like, ooh, you know.
Yeah, and it's this old mangy looking thing.
I know it.
It looks like it has the rickets. It's not pleasant.
They actually made a figure out of that too. I mean, those Star
Oh
Trek.
yeah, it came with one of those figures they made into that movie. Crew came with that little dog thing.
Yeah, he had the rubber, a rubber dog that came with the figure.
Yeah, that was just unpleasant looking. But you know, that's always the thing with Klingons. They always make everything kind of, I don't know. Although I will say that bridge, by Klingon standards, was relatively clean looking, except it was kind of royal. The bridge was like
it was a bit smoky, you know, the bridge.
A little bit, not as much as Next Generation would get, but
but it had that reminiscent of the motion picture bridge that
the AMAR.
Yeah, the AMAR bridge.
Except except for some reason, Krug is on this big giant chair, and everybody's laid down below him like he's a king or something.
Yeah, it's like, you know, what happens if you fall? You're going to land on somebody under you because, you know, you fall out of the chair when you take a hit. You're going to
way up there, you know, and that animal next to him.
It's not a good place to put a chair.
No, you know? And of course they redesigned that bridge to look more Federation in the next movie. I guess which I hated after that. I didn't like that at all. It didn't look very Klingon. It didn't look quite the size of that's the Klingon design they later used, ironically.
Yeah, I know. I never liked it after that. I wish it had kept with the unique look.
Yeah, that was the old rust bucket Klingon look that we talked about, where every ship had to look old and decrepit. Beautiful on the outside, but all rusty and things falling apart.
Even the prototype Klingon ships look rusty and old. And
it's like Klingons just use bucket ships. So anyway, but okay, at the end of Star Trek 3, they go back to Vulcan, and you know, I was thinking about this, and okay, Star Wars, you can come over here just a little bit. I noticed that nobody ever had any intention of going in there and replacing Star Trek 3 stuff with CGI. And I noticed that because, you know, even though that's old model work, and you know, they're doing miniature scenes, I assume, on Vulcan. You know, Blu-ray always emphasizes certain things. It really, really holds up well, effect-wise. I mean, I'm surprised at how well it actually holds up.
Yeah.
I mean, when I say that, I mean, you compare, this is going to be a terrible comparison. You compare Star Trek, The Search for Spock, to Mac and Me.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking of these little old-mouth aliens in these suits. I've never seen that movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, just, you know, effects that do hold up well and ones that don't.
Yeah.
Or, you know, I was going to mention Howard the Duck, but that's a whole other story. But anyway, that era where things just don't hold up quite right, you know, in terms of special effects. But of course, that was Image G. That was high tech for that time. And when you're high tech for your time, it usually stands up pretty well, you know, because people are inspired by it to do what they do in the future.
You know what I liked about that landing scene when they come to Vulcan with that is when they landed it. At the next scene, they show the back. There's like a bridge thing that comes out, and you saw them walking down. So you actually get to see a scale of just how small this bird of prey is. You know, when you see the crew walking out.
Yeah. The fact is, it's most. If I understand the bird of prey, I think is mostly wingspan.
Yeah, you take the wings off. It's nothing but a giant runabout. I mean,
I was going to say it's probably the size of a Daniel runabout, probably.
Yeah, I mean, it's really nothing to it. I mean,
now, if I remember, isn't the whole crew basically in that little front part? Is that about the crew complement?
Yeah, I mean, supposedly there's 2 decks on that, but I can't see how the hell they put 2 decks on the front of that ship, because you look at the blueprints and they seem off to me. It doesn't seem right.
You know, maybe the second deck is like a 19th century sleeping car where you're all contorted. Or something, I don't know.
Well, I know online there's like pictures of the bird of prey, and they have it where they have the decks out, and it seems to me like they add too much to it than that.
Assuming that was a Morel class.
Yeah,
a small.
It's really small. It's very small.
So it's a scout. It's a small scout ship.
Yeah.
I would say somewhere between a runabout and the Raven, about that size.
Yeah.
Or maybe not even as big as the Raven. Maybe.
Yeah.
You know, it's mostly wingspan. The ship is, when you see the crew come out, they're not far in proportion with the rest of the ship. So it's not like this little tiny things coming out of this huge ship.
Yeah,
it's clear it's a tiny ship. So
yeah,
you know.
And I think isn't that the only time we ever see that kind of a Klingon ship ever actually land? You know, we never see it land anywhere else in Star Trek.
Cloaked in the next movie.
What's that?
We see it land cloaked in the next movie.
Well, yeah, when it was cloaked, yeah, but I mean, to actually,
we don't see the actual ship.
Yeah, I think that's the only time we actually see them land the bird of prey. You know,
on Vulcan. So yeah. And They land with and they meet up with Talar. That was the Dame Judith. So what was it, Anderson?
Yep. Anderson, yeah.
Anderson. You know, for years until I knew there was a different character, I thought that was supposed to be an older T'Pau.
Yeah.
Vulcans always have that. You know, these Vulcan High Masters or whatever, they always end up sounding British.
Hmm.
They're always like female Britishy kind of people.
Yeah.
And so, okay, so they're going back. Apparently, Sarek is obsessed with this refusion of the mind and the body, which Talar is basically saying that this is, we've never done this before, from what I'm understanding. This is closer to folklore. Yet Sarek is like, we can do this. And that's when he says, my logic was uncertain. So in other words, he's falling back on what Vulcans consider mystical. So then, you know, they go through this whole thing, and Spock's trying to get to know everybody. And, you know...
You know what was funny about that whole scene? Was that she kind of put up this argument when she said, your request is not logical. Okay, but after he convinces her that to do it, it seemed like everything was already in preparation to do it to begin with. So it's like, well, if it was so illogical, then why did you have everybody all stand?
If you go by Enterprise logic, it basically points out that the Vulcans are the galaxy's biggest trolls. You know, that, okay, well, we'll argue with you. We've already got it set up in case you really want it.
Yeah, everything is all set up to do it, even though your request is illogical. I mean, it's
not like Talar's going to say, Sarek, we have another refusion coming up, so get this over with.
Another
we have like 5 lined up behind you.
We have another one scheduled for tomorrow. You would just have to set it up and see if we can talk him out of it because we don't really want to do it. We're tired.
Like, here's the schedule for the Faltor Pond. You know, we're going to have like 5 tonight and then 2 more tomorrow. We're going to squeeze Spock in. Vulcan mind mail service.
Jeez. Oh,
get a ticket. I mean, did it seem like that? Okay, we got a line of Vulcans who are going to get this Faltor Pond, so you just put Spock in line with Bones. Oh, but he's suffering. They don't care. He's got to get in line with the rest of them. This is assembly line.
He even had the guards there. Christ, they had these big muscle Vulcan guards with those stupid breakable swords. You know,
the ball guys, you mean?
Yeah. Remember the ones where they were fighting with them things that break there when they.
Oh, the Laird things.
Yeah.
They get all these Vulcan swords. And yeah, that is weird now that I think about it. They're all standing there, and he's like, well, your request isn't logical.
Yeah.
I mean, and also you're looking to watch, okay, we got another Faltor Pond in 5 minutes, so, you know, get him up here and get it done.
Yeah.
Assembly line, Vulcan
anyway. We were just hoping you'd change your mind so we wouldn't have to do it.
Well, I guess it's logical to prepare, but it did seem like there was an assembly line there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's assembly line ritualism, you know. But so then this whole thing happens. And, you know, they play it pretty accurate to what a Muck Time showed.
Yeah.
You know, this kind of desert thing. And I always love that scene in the end where, you know, and you know, I just find it so anxious because, you know, Spock's just coming back to life. He doesn't even know what he remembers. Everything's kind of just coming back, sort of, and all in a mix. And there's a scene that I always thought was kind of cute that he looks over at Kirk and says, Jim, your name is Jim. And then McCoy is like, that always implied to me, well, it did, especially when I watched it this afternoon, that when Spock's Katra was in Bones' mind, did Bones somehow kind of, you know, I don't know, kind of leave a few Easter eggs in there to make sure he remembered? I don't know, because I don't know how that worked. I don't know if their minds were fused or if they were like 2 separate minds in their heads.
Well, I guess you could say that each learned something of the other, even though McCoy never really mentioned or said anything about it.
I don't know. Did McCoy have any control over how that worked, or did that just kind of, when Spock wanted to come...
I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. I mean,
well,
if there was...
because when they're on the Enterprise going there's another occasion where all of a sudden you hear Spock's voice. And Kirk's like, oh, that was pretty good, Bones. You know, almost kind of being flippant about it. But it's like, did Spock just like come out of the blue? Like there was that scene where they were in the bar with the Tribbles. I forget to mention the people with the Tribbles. That was a cute Easter egg.
Yeah.
The only times we ever saw Tribbles in TOS again. TOS. And that guy from the Commander Starfleet, who was not, you know, when I was younger, I thought that was also Morrow, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
that random guy who was sitting there saying, "Well, you shouldn't discuss Genesis in public." Like, I find it weird that Starfleet's employing these henchmen to follow the Enterprise crew around to make sure they're not even discussing Genesis.
Yeah.
It's like, boy, this is pretty screwed up. And then McCoy, using his own voice, is like trying to neck pinch him. And he's like, "Oh, you're gonna get a nice long rest." It's like, well, what does anybody in Starfleet know about the Katra?
Yeah.
It's so secret.
Yeah, I mean, because on Enterprise, they talked about how they store Katras in some place somewhere where...
Also, Bones' psychological profile. With the relationship he had with Spock, why would he react to Spock's death by acting like Spock? I mean, I don't know. It sounds like somebody didn't read the manual on Starfleet psychology in that. I mean, I don't know. It's weird. But maybe it was so wrapped up in Genesis, they just started making assumptions.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like it.
I don't know. But whatever the case is, I love it how in the end all order somehow seems to be restored because, Spock says his name is Jim, and then all of a sudden the whole crew are clamoring around him like, "Oh, he's alive!" And it's almost because if you look at Starfleet in that movie, it doesn't seem the usual ordered way it usually is. It seems like everybody's kind of clandestine and they're trying to push everything to the side. And my goodness, one thing about Star Trek I've always thought about, I would love to see Star Trek around the corner sometimes. I would love to see what life was like in that crazy bar that where they have the lit up neon.
Yeah, I was wondering if that bar scene was actually on the space dock or if it was on Earth.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, in the TOS, of course, everybody was retro 60s. And every time you went into like a little bar or something, you heard that Muzak version of the TOS theme. But in this movie, he goes into this club. They're just playing like Muzak.
It almost sounded a little bit like some, like jazz a little bit, like soft jazz.
Well, it was sort of like, 23rd century Herb Alpert, I guess.
Yeah, something like
that effect to it. It was like cocktail lounge music, is what it was. And then there were people playing this little like laser airplane game. Did you see?
Yeah, it was like holograms.
Yeah, and there was a lava lamp, and this woman came over. She had this flipped hair and these big neon wings. I would love to just take a moment and see what that would be. Is that like Star Trek's version of Heart to Heart in there? Is that what that room was? I would love to bring that to life. And like, there was a book out called Star Trek: The Lost Years, where Bones goes to this planet called Arcturus, and he basically goes to that bar. And like I said, you don't know where that was. Was that on Earth? Was that in Space Dock? Was that in Arcturus?
Yeah.
But I mean, we never really saw much of that other world. What was that? And that alien with the little fish whiskers and the ears.
Yeah, the talking backwards.
And the guy with really broken English. Did they have a universal translator with him, or was it broken? Because
I don't know.
The I hear him new guy.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we're probably just assuming there was no translator, and he was just trying to speak English the way the way he figured you learned it. I guess I don't know.
So I mean, that scene was a little bonkers. I think about it. But I think it was also played for comedy a little bit.
Well, they had to have a catalyst as to why he ends up in that, padded cell, basically on, on.
They said there was a scene at the wake where he was acting weird, but as if that scene when his quarters wasn't messed up enough. Now he's trying to neck pinch this Starfleet guy and chartering a space flight from this angelfish guy who's I don't know who that alien was. We never saw that race again.
Yeah.
Like an angel. Looked like a lionfish.
But like I said, that was remember last week, and I was saying they didn't have to have a Section 31 because it seemed to me like the Starfleet security was pretty clandestine in Star Trek 3. I mean, like you said,
I know now you would say, that was Section 31 doing all that Star Trek 3.
Yeah, I know. But they didn't really need it because see how secretive they can be. I mean, this guy was sitting at the bar. You wouldn't even know he was in Starfleet, and he pulls out a badge. I'm Starfleet security.
That little thing comes out saying, and I'll discuss what I like, and who the hell are you? Starfleet security.
Yeah.
They've got their kind of X-Files people in there.
Yeah.
They don't need to have this clandestine organization. They got it as part of Starfleet security. Yeah. Unless that was Section 31. And
oh, God. I hate to go into that. It's like
I don't want to. Let's just, Section 31, don't even go over there. Get out of here.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Don't need it.
So like I said, you're right. That proves we don't need Section 31. So unless you have any points to make, you want to do an overall comment on the movie?
Well, overall, I'd say it was it was filmed, I think, a lot better than Star Trek 2. There was a lot more going on with it besides.
It was kind of a lot. There was a lot of stuff in there that's going on, a lot of plot points, a lot of things they're trying to squeeze into the movie.
I think that's probably why a lot of the fans probably didn't like it as much, is because it was too complex in a way on the story level.
I don't want to say this because I don't like to criticize other Star Trek fans, because I'm a Star Trek fan.
Well, I'm just saying, when you look at the Rotten Tomato meter and stuff like that. And you see
this is not you saying this. I'm just saying I don't want to do this, but I wanted to agree with you because I noticed a lot of people put 2 up on a pedestal. I do not hate 2. I do not hate it. But I will say that people seem to like 2 because there was a lot of phasers and battle scenes. And they seem to like it for that reason. I like 2 because I like it for other reasons that aren't related to people blowing parts of the ship up, pins flying everywhere, whatever.
Yeah.
Well, everybody says, I love it because the pins are flying, With 3, I noticed that whenever Star Trek gets too cerebral, as I said about the cage, people don't think it's good.
Yeah.
It's like, well, if you don't like that, there's other sci-fi odysseys you can watch. I'm going to use that word now. I'm not really fond of the Star Trek franchise. Franchise is like a McDonald's or a Kmart or a Walmart. To me, Star Trek is a sci-fi odyssey.
Yeah.
I prefer to think of it as its own world. The franchise is what's spoiling it, and I'm not going to get into that. But, franchise is financial. I'm not going to get into that. That reminds me of a funny joke from a book I read called Star Trek Final Frontier about Robert April's mission.
Yeah.
I got it thinking it was Star Trek V, the movie. It's called Final Frontier. But when they're proposing the name of the ship to George Kirk, Robert April's like, how about calling it Enterprise? And George Kirk said, sounds kind of financial, doesn't it? I always love that. Like, it does sound financial. But it's just that he's actually, and Robert April goes into this thing about, in the book, every ship named Enterprise was historical. And, I wish they do a Robert April movie. He seemed kind of like a cool character.
Yeah.
Kind of a Picard type.
Yeah.
And always wore a sweater. Anyway, Starfleet kept wearing a sweater would be kind of cool just to have that. But anyway, not to get too far off the point. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that there's a lot going on in the movie. I like there's a lot going on. It's not a movie you fall asleep on.
Nope.
There's a lot to pay attention to. And they do manage to include some humor in it, although it's usually kind of defensive humor because the crew are not being treated too great in this movie, to be honest.
Yeah.
And like Sulu, that guy, I mean, if that had been if Sulu had a personality like Kieran or Reese, he'd have made hamburger and haven't eaten for lunch.
Yeah.
But in the end, he just kind of knocks him over, phasers his panel with some little stick. I don't know, with some little device.
Personal phaser or something.
It was a little stick. I don't know what that was. And he goes, don't call me tiny.
Yeah.
Like, really, that was kind of, I mean, because he's just sitting making small talk, keeping you busy. Don't get smart, tiny. Like, that's kind of uncalled for. Like you said, it's insubordinate. So the humor comes from the fact that they're just kind of taking it very casually. We're being treated like crap.
Yeah.
We came back. We've done these really heroic things, and you're treating us like we're expendable, subhuman.
It almost encourages them to try and just turn their back on Starfleet to take the Enterprise because everybody was treating them like dirt to begin with. So it's like, well, screw you. We're just going to take our ship back and we're going to go do what we want.
So, think about it. It actually gives them motivation. It's like, forget you. We'll just go off and you take your old Excelsior and shove it up your space dock,
Yeah.
But it's basically what Scotty said.
Yeah.
Of course, if you go by novelizations being canon, the relationship between Styles and Scotty, there's another reason behind it.
Yeah.
He did not like Styles. But anyway, that's not canon. But it could fit with it.
Yeah.
Like that whole pompous General Patton
wannabe
attitude he had. But anyway, so yeah, it shows you that there's a side of Starfleet when the security gets involved that has a lot of warts. But it also shows you they're willing to progress into the future with building the Excelsior. I don't know if the Excelsior was a ship that was being thought of during the motion picture time or what. I don't know if it was brand new. I don't know when that came around, but it was obviously a fairly new ship. And, the obvious point of the movie is that Kirk goes against Vulcan philosophy to rescue Spock. He even says the needs of the one outweigh the needs of the many to me in this case.
Yeah.
Although, like you said, maybe it wasn't too bad what he did because But they really weren't treating him that well, so
Yeah.
it all kind of makes sense.
The soundtrack was a lot better to hear because I remember I mentioned when we did Star Trek 2, I was like, you really couldn't hear it, the music. James Horner, when he was, the music in the background, because there was so much, explosions and screaming and lasers and, all the stuff going on, you couldn't really hear it. But in Star Trek 3, it seemed like they volumed up the sound, the background music a little bit better. So you actually got to hear more of it. Which was nice. I could hear, they had some nice pieces there that they played during that film.
Yeah, they tried to emphasize the majesty of it. Now, there's this odd little mechanic, and I have Star Wars over here at a pretty tame place. So, anyway, where Star Trek and Star Wars for a few years were in tandem.
Yeah.
Obviously, Star Wars came out '77, the first one, New Hope, and then motion picture came out.
Yeah.
And then just before Star Trek 2, we had Empire Strikes Back.
Yeah.
And then just before Star Trek 3, we had Return of the Jedi.
Right.
So I always kind of look at that like the piggyback movie to that, like, because I mean, if you think about the timeline, when Star Trek 4 came out, people had just kind of recovered from Jedi.
Yeah.
So now the Star Trek fans were getting their turn. And I see that at that point on, till 91, because that was the end of the Star Trek TOS era movies, that from 4 to 6, they had to piggyback over a Star Wars film. I mean, I just find that interesting when I think about the history of that there was still Return of the Jedi stuff happening when 3 came out.
Yeah.
So I don't think they were per se trying to compete with it because Star Wars inspired started to go to the silver screen to begin with.
Yeah.
Because that was the way sci-fi was going, more theatrical rather than TV.
Yeah.
And,
But I mean, Leonard Nimoy really had a big vision of that movie. I mean, even he said it was operatic in scale. I mean, it was, when he had it put together.
Nimoy directing, I did want to mention that for a guy who'd never directed a film before, as you mentioned that,
yeah,
a few episodes of a TV show somewhere, but to direct a motion picture like this, it really looked and came out really professional.
Yeah.
I mean, aside from the little inconsistencies Star Trek always seems to have in it. Well,
yeah.
I mean, I always ask my mother, because, my mother's one of these people. She'll look at a movie and say, that shouldn't have happened. And I'll say, if you made movies, it would be like 5 minutes. It'd be 5 minutes if you made them. Because, everything has a catalyst, And I mean, you could squeeze any movie into about 5 or 10 minutes if you just move all the catalysts.
Yeah.
Because that's how humans are. And I think Star Trek is about the human condition. And in Star Trek 3, there's a lot of flawed characters, now that I think about it, who make a lot of stupid mistakes they probably shouldn't be making. But in the end, their mission somehow succeeds. Even though they've lost practically everything to gain back Spock.
Yeah.
And, if you want to go past Star Trek 3, that's where you could bring that mirror universe with this crazy Excelsior.
Yeah, it opens the door to that crazy mess.
And we'll kind of shut that down and make the Excelsior a really tiny facility. Anyway, but like I said, I really feel like the motion picture. Although, I don't know, do you think Star Trek 3 really is underrated, per se?
I think it is underrated, to be honest, because I mean, I know they, like you said at the start of this, that they think the odd number movies were terrible, and to me, 3 seemed to be the better of all the odd numbered movies in a way, because
Star Trek 5 yet.
Well, Star Trek 5 is it's in a category by itself. Okay?
Yeah, I mean, you said that the odd numbered movies were kind of underrated, but I don't know how you describe 5, but we'll get to that another time.
Yeah, but I think 3 is probably the better ones of the odd numbered ones. I mean, I like just watching 3, over and over without actually seeing.
Aside from Star Trek 4, which we'll discuss another time, and I do want to discuss 4 because 4 is going to be a hoot. Because I there's so many goodies to do with 4. That's like I'm misty-eyed reminiscing over that. That was my big movie. But anyway, with 3. The fun part of that was, and I want to talk about TV editing a little bit, it's so weird for me to see the Blu-ray because I think of the theme happening and then going right to the freighter, the merchant man.
Yeah.
Because on TV in the old days, they used to have a little edited for television at the end of the theme, and it's clip out that whole Enterprise sequence.
Yeah, I know it. They just snipped it right off of there. I mean, I don't know why they did.
And also that beginning with the funeral scene, they usually clip that out.
Yeah.
Blue thing. When I first got it on VHS, I thought, where did this Enterprise scene come from? Because I didn't see that in the theaters. I was like 4. So, and my parents didn't see it because they were busy raising 4-year-old me. But they missed the Wrath of Khan for the same reason, by the way. But anyway, my mother actually had to buy that in 1989 because she had never seen Wrath of Khan. They were too busy with me at the time when that came out. So, interestingly enough, just as a little tidbit, one of their first date movies was the motion picture. So I'm kind of a Star Trek baby, quite literally. that was the first date movie for my parents, was that first movie.
Yeah.
So, which, by the way, my father isn't generally person, but he actually loves that first one too.
Yeah.
He loves that first motion picture because he loves 2001 and it reminds him of 2001. He loves the quality of it, but he hates about it.
Yeah.
The fact that it's quiet and cerebral.
And the funny thing is that even the actors really didn't think much of that movie either, even after it was done. And it's like, God, what the hell? I think what it was is that,
movies out there.
They were coming back after what? How many years
I think
from
10.
TOS? I mean, and they're just trying to get back into the character.
Well, I mean, I don't mean to be curmudgeonly too much about this, but I mean, would you rather see the motion picture or?
Yeah, really, God.
I mean, if Shatner acted that way through the motion picture, they would have had a point. Anyway, wrong movie.
I mean, if there was any of the movies that he would have been acting like that in, would have been the 5th one. Especially
we're getting to that. That's going to be interesting.
Yeah, when that cell scene there, when he was sitting on the toilet there, and he was like, I'm gonna knock you on your goddamn ass. It's like,
that was better than what happened in season 3 of TOS. So.
Yeah.
I don't even know what that was. But anyway, so Star Trek 3, I would say, had a lot of maturity for the characters. Leonard Nimoy was a great first-time director on that. Gave him the opportunity to direct the next one.
Yeah.
It was a movie I saw a lot growing up. I know 2 was in syndication, but I saw 3 a lot. I think the motion picture in 3 I saw a lot growing up.
Yeah.
I have a lot of familiarity with it, and I noticed things when I watch it every time. And when I saw Return of the Jedi for the first time, I kind of brought myself to that time as being older than I was. Like if I was a 14, 15-year-old in the 80s. Like, I just saw Return of the Jedi, and then Star Trek 4 is coming out, 3. Because here's the thing with me. I know how they argue about it now, but you can't tell me there weren't people who loved Star Wars and Star Trek at the time for very different reasons.
Yeah.
I know some of them. I won't mention names, but they know who they are.
Yeah.
And they're proud of it. They'll actually say, I don't want people criticizing Star Wars or Star Trek. To me, I would watch Return of the Jedi and say, I can't wait till Search For Spock comes out.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. They would say, I love Return of the I love Star Trek too. I can't wait till Return of the Jedi comes out. It would be like, well, I have my Star Wars one year, I have my Star Trek the next.
Yeah.
So you can't tell me. I don't remember then there being this huge division that, that they're later developed. But, that sometimes happens when you get really into something. People develop into these little schools.
Yeah.
People like Star Wars for one reason, Star Trek for another, Marvel for another, Alien for another.
Yeah.
They all have their little worlds. And Star Trek definitely inhabited that world. There were a lot of little places. I would have loved to have seen what that Vulcan Faltor Pond thing was all about, since apparently they had a production line. Like, wait in line and get your infusion.
Get in line.
These fucking lined up to get infused their
Yeah,
bring in your Katra.
Yeah.
Just the idea, already ready for this. Like,
number 59. Everybody's got a ticket, It's
exactly.
Like motor vehicles or something.
It's like, welcome to Disney's Faltor Pond. Get an e-ticket for your mind melt. Either that or they were just totally trolling Sarek. Like, we're gonna give this to you, but we're gonna make you feel a little bad about it too.
Yeah. Like
your logic isn't right. Either that or they just had a queue system. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. But it was. I'd love to kind of pull that world aside and see what that was like. And I'd love to see what was going on in that bar. That there's like people with tribbles playing them on the table, and that little game.
I mean, I talk about a risk. I mean, after what we saw in K7 with those tribbles getting carried away, I mean, I'm surprised they even let one on that thing when that bar got.
I don't know, was that bar on the space dock? Wasn't on the Excelsior.
That's what I don't know. I mean, was it there or was it on Earth or?
Well, who knows? That may have been the 23rd century of Bones' local hometown bar.
Yeah, could have been. You know,
that could have been in the Deep South for all I know. I mean, it seemed like a lounge. Because you go in there, they're playing that little lounge music in there, and they got the people playing with the triples and everything. But I'd love to kind of take those worlds out and kind of, that's something I like to do. Is sometimes I watch Star Trek and I want to take little worlds out of it and kind of do little side projects with them.
Yeah, explore it a little bit.
Star Wars did that.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's coming over here, doesn't it? But side, like they have Star Wars stories. You know, instead of all these prequels, why don't we do Star Trek stories?
Yeah.
Like that bar in Star Trek 3, what went on there? Was there the 23rd century equivalent of Heart to Heart in that room? It had that Robert Wagner-y flavor. I don't know. It seemed like you'd see somebody coming in like, oh, darling, let's play that little game, darling. You know, it just had that vibe to it. You know, well, who knows? Maybe David Hasselhoff could have walked. I don't know. I would love to see the vibe of that place, and maybe there's like a clandestine Starfleet security thing going on in there with that guy with that thing that popped up.
You know, that's the thing about the early 80s and stuff like that when they did science fiction, like you said, Star Wars. I mean, if you look at these movies, it seems like they have stories happening in all these little worlds that are
exactly. They're like it's like these little internal things. Like there's actually action figures made for a scene that lasts 10 minutes in the original.
Yeah. Maybe they just walked by the screen, but they made a figure out of it, you know, or something.
People want to see what was going on in that cantina. Was it just, Greedo and Han? What else is going on in there? What was Max Rebo doing? You know, what were these? You know, so I mean, there are these little scenes that people like to pull out.
Yeah.
You know, so and I think Star Trek has that too. I'd love to see scenes ripped from that and kind of made into little stories. Yeah. And you know, I don't know. I kind of just. Maybe like bring in a Knight Rider type character into that, or like I said, the Star Trek Heart to Heart type vibe, like these gentlemen spies or something. Yeah. In that Star Trek world, just something kind of, 80s movie out of that. Yeah. Or the Vulcan thing, we could just you could do that up as like a serious thing. You could do that up as like almost comedy thing where they have lines to get. So Star Trek 3 actually presents these little extra things you could bring out of it. Yeah. I mean, if you wanted to, I mean, when
we go from Star Trek 3 to Star Trek 4, you really get a sense of the scaling down, basically, of the movie, because like Leonard Nimoy said, I mean, that Star Trek 3 was such a big story and
these little sidebar things that happened,
and then Star Trek 4 just seemed like a TV episode basically, and you get what I'm saying? It's like
it's like one story kind of that happens.
Yeah, it just felt like it was more simpler, and it was more narrow and more.
Like I said, that movie is going to be another time, but like I said, Star Trek.
You really notice the difference though. From going from 3 to 4 with Leonard Nimoy's direction. I mean, it was like, you could really
flavors were different, but like I said, Star Trek 4, I may actually just do that one, I may actually make it one of mine, because Star Trek 4 is, that's, I mean, even though I didn't see that in the theater, that was kind of, this may seem narcissistic to you, but that was kind of my Star Trek movie when I was kind of old enough to really heavily get into it.
Well, you could understand it more, yeah.
Yeah, because I was 6 and everything, and there's other topics to deal with that. But yeah,
I got a funny story about that though. When we do Star Trek 4.
Okay, do you have it where you can remember it, or do you need to write it down?
Oh yeah, I remember it. Now just saying.
Oh my God. Actually, we're not doing them in any order. We didn't even do the motion picture yet.
No.
We're kind of all doing them out of order, so.
Yeah.
I mean, we could do Star Trek 4 some other time.
We're kind of like on the trilogy, 2, 3, and 4, kind of like the trilogy of Star
Trek. That kind of internal thing, because they all kind of bleed into each other.
That's right. Yeah.
Spock dies, he's reborn, he learns to live again.
Yeah.
And then 5. Anyway, that's a, that's a whole...
we weren't learned to laugh again, basically. Make fun of things.
Okay. Sending videos with a laugh is always good. So anyway, Star Trek, and when we do Star Trek 5, we will find things that we like about it, I swear. And I will, because
hey, even the funny things are stuff we could like. I mean, even the stuff we laugh at.
Because I mean, it isn't. I mean, obviously, is intended to be kind of curmudgeonly, and I kind of try to use the word campy, but obviously, it's very intentional.
Yeah.
You know, he's trying to do that. It's not like they're just doing it to do it. Obviously, they can do better in '89, but Shatner is anyway. We'll get to him another time, but this is Nimoy's time to shine. So this is Nimoy's, I believe, directorial debut. Oh, I wanted to mention Gene Roddenberry. I forgot about that.
Yeah.
He's like the executive consultant.
Mm.
You know, I noticed how actually quite little involvement he actually had in this thing. Because it's like, this is a Harve Bennett production. This is Leonard Nimoy directing, and executive consultant Gene Roddenberry.
Harve Bennett really did a pretty good job, you know, with the movies.
Yeah, and I didn't know until recently that he was actually, his first baby was the Mod Squad.
Yep.
My parents just got that series. So I'm like, okay, so he goes way back to the 60s and 70s. So by Star Trek 3, you know, I mean, I suppose because he kind of helped Nimoy out. It looks like Nimoy did a lot of his own thing on his own, his directing.
That's right. Yeah.
That's probably why he didn't have much of an appearance in the movie, because he had to direct it. And it'd be hard to direct himself acting. He did that the next movie, but this one he wanted to kind of just have his first try.
Yeah.
And it worked. I think it paid off. Star Trek 3 obviously did well enough to make another movie.
Yeah.
So I would say it was an underrated, some underrated.
Yeah.
I don't hear a lot about it, to be honest. It's always considered kind of a low-bearing film.
That really doesn't seem to fit what we saw.
Well, when I say that, they're like, well, that just comes between 2 and 4, which were the most amazing movies ever. I don't know if I'd call them that, but Star Trek 3 is not insignificant. It is kind of sandwiched between them, but you kind of, in order to have 4, you kind of have to have 3. We don't need, obviously 2 did not require 3. 3 could have been a wholly different movie.
Yeah.
But they did it. So I think it was, they brought Spock back in an interesting and imaginative way. It wasn't like they just built some machine or just cloned him. I mean, they could have just gone that way with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Some movies have, but
yeah.
They actually bought a new Vulcan mechanic. So, like I said, watching it today, I was, I forgot how good this actually was. Because I just thought, okay, I'm a child. I watched this, and so anyway, you have anything more to say about the movie?
No, that's it. So
anyway, up to episode 24 next week, and until then, live long and prosper.
Right.